I'm Oliver Bruce, dyslexic and dyspraxic serial entrepreneur with little more than one GCSE, but none of that matters. And that is exactly why I started this podcast. I've built multi-million pound businesses from just an idea, and I've gone into markets that I've got no right to be in. No. It's not always plain sailing, and what you see on social media is often a fraction of the reality. I somehow wanted to tell the candid truth, the story around startup and scale-up life, and just how important mental agility and strength is in this largely idealistic and fake world. I hope you enjoy my podcast and can take some solace and some learnings from the unspoken reality and subjectivity of the term success. This is Success is in the Mind, and thank you so much for watching.
Talk to some scientists and say some might say we're actually only a few years away from warming to 1.5 degrees.
You've now planted 43.1 million trees, and that's over only a couple of years.
It's overwhelmingly like 95% of businesses just don't know what their footprints are. That's a real problem. I think climate change is a marketing and communications problem.
So, Elliot's entrepreneur activist, but it didn't all start there, did it? You were in the world of tech, IT development. Why did you come into the world of sustainability after such a long time not doing it?
Sustainability, thank you, Oliver. Sustainability's been around in the back of my head, loitering around, niggling away. And it's from a super early age that I really kind of clocked the scale of climate as a real challenge. And it's been festering. And while developing my skills as like a technology person, I just thought there's an opportunity here that we can do something about it.
You said off air that you were speaking to your mum, and one of the earliest sort of recollections of the world of sustainability and in the environment was having a chat and just going, what is it, to your mum?
Yeah.
What brought that on, and why were you so actively aware at such a young age?
I weirdly enough don't remember many conversations from an early age. I'm an amazing mum, but I mean, the only thing that really stuck into my head is my first proper conversation where I had this back and forth with her, and I was asking, this climate change thing sounds genuinely bad, and Mum made an amazing response to saying, you know, we've always faced challenges and we've always got through them, and that was a really lovely thing to hear. But I still went away from it going, yeah, but this one is sounding really tricky. Yeah.
How long ago was that then?
I must have been when I was super young. I don't know, maybe 7-ish.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. And you at that point decided that you might want to do something to change the world, or at least change your carbon footprint.
I think it was more that I just innately understood what this meant and what this was leading to. And you know, as a very young age, you just think that, you know, an important topic will get eventually looked at and, you know, be given the right kind of
sorted
treatment.
by somebody else.
Sorted by important people, you would have thought. And you know, as the decades wore on, it was still no progress.
No.
And with the arrival of my daughter, I was just I just can't do my current job without doing something in this area anymore.
How old is your daughter?
So she's 5 now, 5.5, and yeah, we kicked off Ecologi when she was about 18 months old.
Wow.
And it was a terrifying time. Yeah. And if we were to do it again, I'm not sure we would do it again. It was on the rocks, the whole thing. Like, so I started this with my wife, who's my co-founder and brand. So, but our little darling daughter, my God, it was a baptism of fire, and it didn't stop. My daughter had like a really rocky start, and so it just meant you couldn't put her down for more than 1 minute without her protesting. Exhausting. And we managed to catch. I said to my boss, I said, I need just like 10% of my time off. Me and my wife, we can like with a babysitter or whatever. We're just going to go for a walk, go for a little gentle rock climb or something that we used to do. And then that very first half day off, we started chatting about an idea that I'd had the previous week about potentially doing something for climate.
And that idea kind of came about on your morning commute. You're getting a coffee, and you kind of went, well, if this coffee's costing me £3-4, whatever it was, then why aren't I just putting that money into sustainability and climate change? And what if the rest of the world did exactly the same thing? And that was the kind of birth of the idea, right?
Yeah, it was just, I calculated probably my 1200th coffee on the way to work. And I was just like,
in one day.
Yeah, I was just struck by this moment of going like, how many coffees am I just chucking this money into?
Mm.
And this thing that I proclaim to be really kind of aware of, not doing anything about it. And then I got to my desk, and then at lunchtime, I was just did a little research, just like how much climate action could you actually fund with one coffee's worth a week, for example, is about, I don't know, £3. And I just couldn't stop researching after that into the evening and days after day.
Mm.
And on the face of it, I could offset my entire carbon footprint by funding the best climate action that is available to fund. They could also plant like maybe 12 trees a month as well, on top
Mm-hmm.
of the other climate solutions of funding too,
Mm-hmm.
all for the cost of a coffee a week. And then I think, well,
One coffee a week,
one coffee a
12
week.
trees a month.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very efficient, capital efficient to fund climate action. Certainly in 2019, early 2019, and it. I thought, well, this is good for me. This is a good impact that I can make. I can feel more connected to the thing I'm trying to help here. But what if we reached a scale like Netflix or Spotify, where they're at 200 odd million paying subscribers? If we kind of times our numbers by their
Mm-hmm.
numbers, it's mind-boggling. It's
Yeah.
about 20%, maybe 30% of the world's emissions
Yeah.
reduced or removed.
Because since your 12 trees a month sort of thing, you've now planted 43.1 million
Yeah,
trees. And that's
yeah,
over only a couple of years.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So this time last year was 12 million, and now it's 43 million, maybe 13 million. So, and it's about 50,000, 100,000 trees a day.
Wow.
And every now and again, I just like to try and think about what that must be like to
Yeah.
try and plant those 100,000 trees in
Yeah.
a single day. Me and my wife and the third co-founder, Alex, we initially joked about what would that be like if we planted 1 million trees one day, through what we were doing, and kind of giggled a bit. We didn't have that self-confidence yet, didn't have that ability to kind of have to see where the next subscriber would come from, but then we were on a nice track.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting about you, Elliot, is you obviously went to Bournemouth University to study computing. You went into essentially computing and IT. As an individual, you strike me as an introvert to a certain extent, doubting yourself, not thinking you can get the next sale or get that person to sign up and subscribe. But yet you're doing the one thing that so many people can't do, and that is changing the world. Why and how did you kind of fall into it, and why is it going so well?
So that's a really, really interesting thought. And I reckon the reason that I can be, as an introvert, and as you understand of me, and it's kind of generally humble, and sometimes you have to force the good stuff out of me, because I don't like to make anyone else feel a bit shit about
We'll
their
get there.
job. Oh, what, you haven't spent your company hasn't done 40 million trees, but we have.
Only 20
I'd
million, that's rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's something about whether I could be the right custodian of the mission that we're on, because I am highly ethical. I'm this kind of normal, everyday person who's grounded, who has what I believe is a really good moral compass. And if we have this mission to one day reduce half the world's emissions by 2040, then it deserves to have someone who can do this with heart, who can do this and can keep us on the straight and narrow. And so I feel like this is it's a great fit for me. I need people around me to kind of give me that confidence to keep on going, and that confidence just does come eventually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously in the world of IT and in the world of tech, you were a contractor, and it took a couple of years for you to actually move into a business and actually manage a team. Again, going back to that introvert thing, managing a team, not easy for most people, let alone somebody who's actually an introvert. How did you kind of cope with that transition?
It was good and bad. So what was good is that I felt myself, for the kind of the values that I have in ethics, and the kind of my main aim is to create a happy team that performs well. And I think Google spent inordinate amounts of money finding out what a successful team looks like, and in the end, after millions of dollars spent, it turns out that a happy team is the most performant team. And so I felt natural there, and I could keep on going. I think as an introvert, the back-to-back meetings, as we were talking about earlier, the going out after a full day and then having drinks, and then obviously still talking about work afterwards, doing repeat, that is draining. I have to look at my own calendar and you know, have those breaks, you know, as always good just to kind of just be by yourself. And it's strange how an introvert gets their strength from just some solitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that has been my long-term balance that I kind of work with. But it allows you to get great perspective about the problems that you might be having wherever it might be.
So do you do mindfulness, meditation? Do you do things like that in terms of when coming to solitude with an idea or with an issue or with something that's set to challenge you? How do you deal with that?
I've thought about it a lot. I had crippling burnout when I was at this kind of media company, when I was CTO there, and I was managing about 35 people. And our daughter turned up, and the sleep was gone then as well. And I was flat on the bed for a few weeks, being so useless,
Yeah.
you know, as a dad and as someone as a CTO and all sorts. There's a lot of reflection, and you start to try and, you know, lash out, or not lash out, you try anything, and you know, and as a researcher, I've been through that whole thing and seen it. What was interesting was when I was lying in bed, burnt out, and I was doing some research, so I was finding out more and more about the mind-body connection, and it's so interesting, as you probably you know, aware, and as many of us fortunately over the last decade are becoming more and more aware. And it made me think about this time at university where I just I was having an incredible time, like I just, which is unusual, you know, first year or two is a bit wobbly, and then I kind of did like an internship and came back and I started doing some work, and I was like, this is what the whole thing's about. Did a final year, met my now partner,
Things
things.
for university.
Yeah, well, yeah, on the kind of the year out, and then yeah, and it was, everything was fantastic. And then I started, well, I was rock climbing a lot of the time, and I thought, oh God, I really sore hands, and it's harder to do kind of write thousands of lines of code a day, and it was getting worse and worse. And then I'd read something on the internet about, oh, what, the RSI is just in your wrist, just you wait until it gets into your elbows. And then honestly, the next morning, it was in my elbows. I was like, whoa, this is insane. And everything was numb, all sorts of things. And then I was on that, well, so that, I'm a researcher, and I'd found that there's only a handful of people who kind of recover from RSI. And,
Really?
you know,
I
yeah,
didn't know that.
yeah, for long term, you know, the mind, you know, it could be that you go for surgery and then you think that actually that worked for you. And then your body gets confidence, or your mind gets confidence that this works well. The placebo effect is really strong, and that can genuinely help. Or if a really caring doctor looks after you, that can be all that your body and mind actually needs. But yeah, you know, when I found out, for me in particular, not for everyone, but for me in particular, this RSI, which I thought was a rock climbing injury, I was able just to kind of overcome it that night. Someone said on a forum, said, just do the opposite of what you're doing. So, you know, instead of doing like fewer lines of code or no computer games, how about just stay on a computer for a few hours just to play a great game? Does it get worse or does it get better? And it got better. And then the next morning, it's absolutely insane. And so I went from having to research jobs that didn't involve hands because I thought my life was over because of this horrible thing, into into just getting back on track and writing lines of code in the least ergonomic way possible. And so when I was flat on my back of the recent burnout, it all came flooding back, and I've just become aware of this crazy dynamic, the brain that is hoping to kind of secure you. You know, in the RSI thing, there wasn't actually anything bad in the world, externally bad. I was having a great time. You don't often always need something bad to happen. And so, you know, it's just an understanding of the things that are at play and challenging you. Do you need more to be wrapped in cotton wool, or can you take this off? And so now, I've been through it and I've been to the depths, but it's very well managed now.
It's really interesting because it must be completely subjective. It won't work for everybody just to think, be better, and you'll get better. I mean,
you have to be at your wits end as well. I've tried everything else as well. That's the only bit, because no one will want to be told that it's in the mind.
No, although success is.
Yeah.
Hey. No, in terms of, I totally buy into that because as a kid, I did a lot of homeopathy, alternative therapy. And I do believe that actually there is a strong element of if you're focused on something, it either disappears and gets better, or you can do it.
Mm.
Where when you accept that something is going to go wrong, 9 times out of 10 it does go wrong. And actually, it's similar with your RSI. Now, interestingly, at university when you were at Bournemouth, you said that you struggled a little bit. Why did you struggle, and kind of how did you cope with that? Was it like, as you say, dropping out and doing an internship, or what was the coping mechanism you had in place?
Yeah, I just kind of coasted through a lot of academia. I didn't.
Did you enjoy
I was only the bits outside of the academia bits.
the social
great university experience, for example. Yeah, probably a little too good. But I was just I was floating around and unattached, and honestly, I was just unconnected from the world at large, and as like an only child, and my experiences as going through as like an introverted kind of computer game nerd and everything, I felt like I hadn't seen or connected the dots enough. And I was just fortunate to get an internship essentially, and it's like, oh, okay, this is a job. I enjoy doing it. It's a bit better than my Sainsbury's job that I had previously on the checkouts, and I just felt this kind of real zest, and I felt driven, and that experience just put me onto something really fantastic.
It's interesting because there's so many developers, coders, tech entrepreneurs out there that very much like you were an introvert, didn't necessarily enjoy university, but nevertheless became a huge success after they left. I mean, you can look at Mark Zuckerberg for one, you can look at Martin, who's down the road, who runs Haboo. You might have.
Oh yeah.
Exactly the same story as you in terms of being a tech entrepreneur, but being an introvert, not really wanting to go into business for business' sake, but wanting to make a difference. And actually, what you've kind of done is made a business that does or focuses on sustainability quite tech orientated. The subscription model is quite innovative in terms of you've got the Netflix, you've got the Spotify, you have that model. Was that always something that you kind of pulled on, that kind of technology background?
Definitely. So the climate, in a way, the science is already, as they say, clear. We know how to fix the planet. There is a lot of money in the world. We need to be able to kind of connect the two together. So it sounds really reductionist, but I think climate change is a marketing and communications problem. We're not getting behind what we need to be getting on with. It's obviously a political consideration too, but there's enough money, there's enough solutions that surely there's a way of marrying the two. And I was doubting myself, like, my background isn't environmental science and atmospheric science. Do I have the ability to make that transition? And now Ecologi is 75 people. Over 3/4 of them aren't climate backgrounds. We still need marketers. We still need communicators and, operations people and all sorts of things. And this is what's brilliant about working in climate, is that so many people can use their skills outside of climate into the world of climate. There's a very thin layer in the top, which is just like piping money into climate action. The rest is just a tech job or just another startup scale up, essentially.
What's interesting is that so many businesses now are doing what they call greenwashing, where they're going, okay, we're going to plant some trees. Oh, okay, fine, we'll put some LED lights in the office and we'll have some cans of water in our fridge. But they don't really actually care about it. They're just doing it because it's cool. You can maybe PR it and that's it. How do you sort of weed out the wheat from the chaff, I suppose, and actually genuinely work with businesses that genuinely want to make a difference, and not just go, we're doing this because we need a tick box?
Absolutely. So funding climate solutions is, there are enough solutions out there that if we fund, then we will take more carbon out of the atmosphere than we put in. So that's exciting. But carbon offsets, you probably have heard of, and your audience will have too, had a terrible history, finding out that these projects failed or worse than failed in some instances. It's like, we felt that as a founding team, if we could get to the bottom of, whether, where are the effective projects, etc. And if we can convince ourselves as kind of, innately cynical, we guess, that maybe we could have the ability to also convince others that these are the real deal. These are actually fixing the planet. So that's how we started, being able to show you the impact that you can make. Then came the fear. It's just ever, which fear comes next sort of thing. Then was the fear, okay, great. So we know funding climate action works, but is this going to be misused? And so we constantly have this kind of in ecology, have this back and forth. On one hand, everyone should be funding climate action. On the others, how is it being used in particular instances? And so now we've got maybe 13,000 businesses who are funding climate action now. I have basically never seen any of our businesses funding climate action use this vehicle as genuinely greenwashing. There might have been some that I might not have been privy to, but we do talk to a lot of our businesses and we see what they're up to, and they tag us on their LinkedIn posts. There's there's a lot of genuine heart, like there's a genuine want to do more, and the greenwashing thing is paralyzing for some businesses. Like especially the larger business that you are going like, we don't know, is this going to backfire? Are we going to be called out for the thing that we're not doing? And then there are some real juggernauts of businesses that, do you allow them to turn around, or do you let them kind of to crash and burn? And we have this kind of ethical dilemmas kind of group on our team communication channel. It is rich. We've got this external climate committee who are made up of brilliant academics, industry experts, and they're the kind of the impartial third party, and they say any business should be able to fund climate action. You just got to let them do it. And then for us as Ecologi, we like that, but imagine our brand reputation risk. Let's say the world's worst business said, "Oh, we've funded this amount of climate action with Ecologi." We're not going to come off well with that. And so there's a real balance, and I think we can be braver when we're a little bit older, and we've got more track record. But it's constant and it's deep and it's broad. But generally speaking, businesses are looking for ways, and many businesses are at the beginning of their journey. Quite often it takes a small action to kick off another larger action. If you think about, I don't know, you might have done something in your garden, or you might have done something where you do like a beach clean or planted a tree like in your own garden, and then you might feel like a real connection to that action that you've made. Is it going to save the planet? No. But then maybe there'll be the afterglow that you feel better about what you've done, and you go and your eyes are slightly wider, and so what else can I do? What's that next action? So it might have been that you went in your office and you took away all the dairy milk, like the actual cow's milk, and they replaced it with alt milks, and then maybe it led to something else the week later, and then maybe a week after that they might be looking into how to do a net zero strategy. And so we're really, really encouraging of all of those small actions, that they can lead to something fantastic. And that greenwash brush is heavy. It's a bit like a witch hunt at times, and we've had it pointed in our direction and pointed in different directions, and it's hard, but I understand that there is real greenwashing out there too.
100%.
And so it's a case by case sort of jobby.
It is, and I get that. And in terms of, I mean, you can look at using us as a case study, I suppose, in this instance, my business now, we're going through the B Corp certification program, which actually I think is really, really important, and actually it's becoming more and more apparent to most things that we go for from a tender point of view or from an RFP point of view. It specifically says, are you B Corp certified? And it's almost like an ISO now. It's almost like an ISO where it's a specific industry standard you have to be. And it's interesting that the world's pivoting towards that now. Do you see a lot of people come on board and say, we're going through the B Corp certification? Yes. It used to be quite niche.
Yeah, absolutely. It's amazing that B Corp is picking up. And ultimately, a business wants a stamp to be able to point to something and say, look at the thing that we've done. And that's really brutal in terms of, surely businesses should be okay just doing it anyway without having to point to something. But that's not how a check's going to get signed off, or a big investment of time. Like, you're going through B Corp, a big investment in time to do it. Absolutely. And, having that stamp when it means something is vital. We're working on our own stamp, as be remiss of me to say, but B Corp is amazing for keeping you to an ethical, socially responsible company. We hope that Ecologi Zero certified will be this kind of perfect kind of bedfellow to kind of complement on the climate side, essentially. With B Corp and Ecologi Zero side by side, we hope that those two are the kind of the minimum standard of that represent a business that's on the right side of history.
So in terms of B Corp, obviously there's an element of ethics in there, or the majority of ethics in there, whereby actually it's about employee engagement, it's about employee clarity, transparency across the business. With Ecologi Zero, I'm assuming it's all going to be sustainability focused, and that kind of is the difference between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. We're opportunity rich with Ecologi, and so quite my job is just to kind of keep us on the straight and narrow with what's our particular neck of the woods and climate for sure. And so B Corp handle the ethics
Yeah.
superbly, and we couldn't do any better. So with Ecologi Zero certified is one day, well, we're going to be launching it in next month, so that's July.
Because when this airs, it'll be out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. So businesses don't know what their carbon footprints are by and large unless you're of quite a large scale. You know, it's overwhelmingly like 95% of businesses just don't know what their footprints
Mm-hmm.
are. That's a real problem. You know, the majority of the world's carbon pollution is locked up in the world of commerce and business. So how I felt that we had this big responsibility here as Ecologi that we could do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
For a very small business, getting a carbon accountant into your business and then, you know, paying for a couple of weeks worth of work, that's a couple of £1,000s for a micro-sized enterprise. And then it's exponentially more expensive as the larger the company goes with, you know, more interesting and complicated supply chain too. We see a role for technology. And so what we've done with Ecologi Zero is allow you to automatically understand your business carbon footprint by integrating with your accounting software. Lots of businesses have accounting software. Yeah. And so every single transaction that your business spends any money on, essentially, is this amazing paper trail of where your carbon emissions lie. And then the real magic comes in with the technology, which analyzes the suppliers that are involved in that transaction, gets all the right metadata in these vast carbon databases, and builds up a big picture. So that's really exciting. That's a great way of adding a lot of accuracy to carbon footprints. But when it's automated, there's then an opportunity of actually just giving this away for free. So with Ecologi Zero, we don't believe that there should be any financial barrier at all to understanding your carbon footprint and getting on with your net zero journey.
In terms of giving it away for free, then that's massively ethical. That is impressive, because I thought you were going to charge for it. What is the cost then in terms of working with Ecologi to get Ecologi Zero?
So any business can measure the carbon footprint, understand where their emissions are, and get onto the net zero journey for free. There's a lot of R&D costs that we've put into this, and so there's little limitation elements, but you'll be able to see where the hotspots of your emissions are. You'll be able to make decisions based off it, and seeing is believing, really. Seeing is being able to actually make those changes that you're after. We've got Ecologi Zero Premium and then Certified, which are paid elements, but they're, you know, we're not going to do our job if they're going to be out of reach for the sorts of size of businesses that we want to work with. So it's like 50 quid a week, a month for small businesses, and then scales up for larger ones. So still very doable compared to the £1,000 a year potentially that you'd be looking at.
And it sounds like you've got your business model kind of sorted now. You know what you do, you know where you're going, you've raised a lot of money, and we'll go into that bit in a minute. But when you started it in 2019, you were a non-for-profit essentially. So, you know, great idea, nice and ethical, good morals there, charity-based, non-for-profit, I get it. Yeah. You're not that anymore. Why did you decide to change from non-for-profit to profit over the course of the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm not in it for the money. No one that started the team was in it. We're here genuinely to help solve this big problem with the planet, and it made sense that we're, you know, as structures as a non-profit, there's an altruistic thing. Be great if I create security for my own family. You know, as a dad, that's the kind of stereotypical thing that I think about that lots of others do. Yeah. But it didn't take long to realize that non-profits and charities, their scaling is on a different level, on a smaller level, to the likes of, if you think of like when Uber arrived and Airbnb arrived, it just arrived overnight almost, didn't it? Yeah. And those are venture-backed companies, essentially. Yes. You know, where you raise investment ahead of you generating the revenues that you're looking to get in 2 years' time, for example. Yes. And that, you think about climate and our dwindling carbon budget. You know, you can talk to some scientists and say some might say we're actually only a few years away from warming to 1.5 degrees, and it's a handful of years. We need that kind of rampant scale opportunity that you get from kind of what you think of Silicon Valley style companies to be able to happen now, and that's what clinched it. So we've had to form as a for-profit, which feels really against our better judgment. Yeah. So what we've been doing, and my role is, I kind of joke to myself that I'm kind of chief ethics officer, because if I'm technically running a for-profit company, I have to align as much as we possibly can to the world of non-profit. So now our margins are, on average about 18% overall in terms of we keep 18% and 82% gets spent on climate action. If you think about most non-profits or charities, their margins are around 40%, maybe 50%. And so we still can do, in theory, a lot more for our cause, in this category.
Before we get back to the podcast, I wanted to ask you, are you a high-growth startup or an ambitious entrepreneur? Our headline sponsors, Capsule Cover, are the perfect insurance specialists if you are geared for high growth. Here at Pinpoint Media, we use Capsule Cover for all our insurance. So if you're an ambitious, high-growth startup, why not reach out to them via capsulecover.com? Coming up in this episode, are you an entrepreneur or an activist?
Really hard to get excited about a methane digester that gets added onto a landfill site that sucks up the waste methane and converts into renewable energy. Cool for the nerds, but
That wasn't scripted, I can promise you.
It's great.
That is all to come in this episode of Successes in the Mind. And when you went and started it, then you were funding it yourself as a non-profit, right? So you were putting your own, I'm assuming your own cash in there to try and get it somewhere.
Yeah.
How long did you have the business, or I should say charity then, until you kind of ran out of cash and had to because you went to General Catalyst essentially, who had invested in Deliveroo, Snapchat, Airbnb, which you named earlier.
Yeah.
And you got 4 million quid from them. But before that, it was all your own money. When did you run out?
Yes. So it was. So kept the day job for as long as possible.
Rightly so.
And someone who's a bit of a connoisseur of burnout, that was quite hard. And we just made it work as long as possible. My mum has a friend, and she just really bought into what we were seeing, and she inherited some money that she didn't need, and there was 15 grand that we were able to kind of get started with, and that was just enough to kind of get us whirring for about 6 months. And then we actually met an angel investor who was about 9 months onwards, and he was trying to build his own version of what we were doing essentially, and we saw eye to eye. And I felt like, I'm not sure who this guy is. It sounds like not kind of our sort of people, Mayfair background,
right.
And kind of investment banker and all sorts of things. And my first judgment of him was just like, not sure. He comes with some money, like, should we be doing this? And then he was just absolutely perfect. He is possibly the kind of the biggest influence that we've had. Like, moral compass is incredible. Very, very different backgrounds, but he kept us going.
Yes.
Gave us that confidence to the next steps. And so, yeah, we're really indebted to this chap.
Was that before you got the 4 million quid?
Yeah,
then? So,
exactly. A year before that, 4 million quid.
So you had 15k from your mum's friends.
Yeah.
You then met this gentleman, Philip. What did he put in then?
It was around 200 grand, 300 grand.
So 200 grand. So you'd had, let's just say, sharp £250,000 in the business, kept you going for a year. Why did you think £4 million was the right amount of money?
Good question. So we were getting excited. Things were on the up, and we felt confident for once. It would go like, yes, we can do that million trees that we were talking about, and we can take it much further. And we got the ball rolling, and we just started to have a good time with it. And then you go on the roadshow, the kind of fundraise roadshow. Lots of conversations. It's a bit like what you might have seen on TV or depicted. You get the grilling and all sorts, and there was a real life experience. But really, it was through hard work of meeting people and getting recommendations, and we just got a bit of a lifeline, really. And General Catalyst, as you mentioned, they do the overnight success sort of stuff by getting everything whirring. And £4 million was going to cover 18 months of the high growth path that we wanted to set out.
So you've got 18 months worth of burn rate on 4 million quid.
Yeah.
What are you spending that money on?
Yeah.
Is it staff, offices, brand? What is it?
Yeah, it's staff and it's marketing.
Okay.
I'd love to say that you can just hire people from amazing places where they're getting paid exceptionally well, but then they take a bit of a cut because they're doing it for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really wash. They're still looking to do their own kind of security at home sort of thing. You know,
Yeah.
they've got their own family. Maybe they're people they're looking after their parents. They're not sure about, and you know there are you're doing a good thing, which I found quite a lot of in any
Yeah.
circumstance. Just because you're doing a good thing, that doesn't necessarily mean there are those shortcuts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's marketing spend. What was interesting about marketing spend is it was great. It was we had a good time spending a lot of money, and then
I bet you did.
yeah. It's like woo, we can do some really really cool
Much more
stuff.
fun spending someone else's
Yeah,
cash.
but something that happened over the last few months, and our relationship with how we were going to grow, or my understanding of how we are going to grow, was about spending money through marketing. You know what? And it wasn't paying off like it used to. And we started using money as a bit of a sticking plaster. And over the last few months, it's just like, oh, shoot, our growth is locked in to spending money. And over the last few months, it's about I brought it back home. Let's slow down again. Let's look under the microscope of increasing that value exchange for the end person or business that's using what we're doing. You know, we're very kind of values led, and we know that when we invest in our values, then amazing creative kind of genuine stuff starts to happen. But we'd come away from that, and it was interesting. Money stopped working like it should have, and it kind of came to a bit of a head. And it's been really really refreshing recently, just taking stock and going like, what's the kind of core stuff that makes this different, makes us unashamedly ecology. And I've personally been feeling just so much better about what we're doing and where our next layers of growth is going to come from, just by being us and kind of getting to our core.
But what's interesting, Elliot, is that you have worked all this out yourself, kind of thing. You said that you took a step back and you looked at where you're spending the money and it wasn't working. But that's not your background. You've never done any of that. How did you know where to put that 4 million quid, when to pull some of that back, when not to put it on A and put it on B instead?
Yeah, you got to surround yourself with brilliant people, lots of diverse voices, and having that kind of external sight when you're really close to it is really hard, But as an introvert and being able to take time away, I the best thing I did last Christmas was take about 3 weeks off. I needed it. And then I came back. It's like, oh, I see everything that I need to do now. It was fascinating. Probably the 3 weeks off is probably the most valuable thing, the decision that we'd had. I think, I do have good ethics and moral compass, but I do have an ability to see the direction that we should be heading. Obviously, it comes to light when you have those bumps in the road, and it's about taking stock. And we've you've got we could have just carried on in lots of different circumstances, and I always look fondly back on those moments to go, I'm glad we did something about that, and we changed it up and changed the gear.
Give me an example of one of those, because obviously you were incredibly drained when your daughter was born because you were running multiple different things. But from a business standpoint, when you went, right, let's change that up a notch, down a notch, left, right.
Yeah.
Give me an example of that.
Just on a slightly different tack, but there's a little similarity too. There was, in our first year, we wanted to, so COP26 was maybe kind of we were almost 12 months old, and the climate conference was coming up, and actually it was postponed. Yeah, actually, so it was our first year because it was postponed for basically a year, so it was still year one, and we were wondering about how could we get Ecologi's name out there fast, like really, really quick, rather than being incremental. We got started excited about what about if we ran, because the climate conference COP26 up in Glasgow, it's going to be very political, very corporate. Could we run a conference that is like the kind of the authentic voice of I don't know, that kind of embody the human response to climate change? It was like, oh God, we could run our own kind of virtual climate conference. And it just started going mad. In the end, we had about 140 speakers. It was like Glastonbury. Wow. We had Prince Charles opening it. It was incredible.
You had Prince Charles on it? Really?
It was insane. That was like a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. Yeah.
Wow.
And we looked, and it was great. It was great. Don't get me wrong. But we spent, it was like, hang on a minute, we just spent about 4 minutes not building our product, not investing in the kind of the core value exchange. We look back on it going like, we got to just take some time, just invest in what the end user or the end customer is going to be wanting from you. That it's so easy to just kind of like get excited, go chasing, and then run off. And this tiny team who is obviously just impact. We were building an events website and a ticketing thing and all the integrations, and there was like multiple live stages and all sorts of stuff. I was like, what are we doing here? But after that, it makes you go like, right, okay, let's not do that again.
Yeah.
Let's spend this time with like a moratorium on anything new.
Yeah.
Let's just build something really decent.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good bump in the road. And the only other thing I can really think of as just this bump in the road, like I was saying earlier, where you think that doing something for good or for climate, you should get like a free pass. For example, legal challenges. I was thought, well, no one's going to really want to do cease and desist and shut us down because we're trying to do something good for the planet. But we were getting our trademark for Ecologi. This is all sorted now. But for about 9 months, it looked like we're going to have to shut up shop.
Really?
Yeah, there was can't go into details, but there was a company, a little similar-ish sounding word, but nowhere near it, in my mind. And but from a complete different industry. Imagine one of the trickiest industries that you could, or diametrically opposite. And
Right. Okay.
they wanted to shut us down because they were worried about people would be confused with thinking we were them and vice versa. And it just wasn't going to happen. And then the thing about the trademark system is that you're on the back foot. If you've got a new trademark coming, then the incumbent has real power there. And we some clever legal stuff towards the end, and just on the 11th hour we managed to get it sorted out. But we'd we'd only really just changed our name. We were originally called Offset Earth, and
What?
yeah,
Nice.
yeah. So within our first year, we were called Offset Earth, and we found that, well, offset was too narrow. It wasn't giving us the right remit. We're planting trees, which isn't offsetting anything anytime soon. We're doing all sorts of other things, and they are doing the offsetting, and then it wasn't very international sounding and all sorts of things. So that wiped us out for ages. Coming up with, have you ever tried to change a name or anything? Is horrible.
I've done trademarking and I have
Yeah.
done that, and it does take time and is,
Yeah.
as you say, a massive pain.
For training.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we just got changed, and then changed the name, and then we had a wobble with our new name, but fortunately all under the bridge.
Well, Ecologi is a superb name, and in terms of how you came up and ideated that, was that you? Did you spend money on a marketing agency, branding agency? What did that look like?
Oh wow, it looked horrendous. I hats off to our fourth co-founder Ian, and he did us a solid. So for about 3 months, every single shower cycle or every time I closed my eyes, I was rattling off other names. I was like, no, that's rubbish, that's shit. I was just like, oh, that isn't us. And my God, every board meeting, every leadership, every pub chat, it was just names. Trying to get something like a decent.com, which is almost impossible.
Yeah.
A good name that represents what we're doing, a .com available, a trademark that's viable, although, still rocky. It was just all of these combined. And then I'd given up.
What names did you
I
have?
had a lot of resolve. Oh my God. I'd love to publish the list. Can I think of any? It was a bit of post-traumatic kind of period of time that kind of like, we need a freaking name here. It was bonkers. It was absolutely bonkers. But what happened? So Ian, God bless him, late night, one night, just WhatsApped me, said ecologi.com was available, £10,000, not insignificant. I was like, nah, it's just shit like all the others. And I woke up the next morning going like, that's thought pretty good, because we really do love the natural planet. We love the 2-for-1 deal you get when you support natural climate solutions. You're helping our climate problem, but also helping the massive biodiversity loss problem. And it's a real part of what we do. I was like, oh, it's pretty good. And over the weeks, you become worse and worse and worse at seeing where the actual good options were.
Yes.
God bless him. And yeah, we went after it and got it locked in.
There's a level of irony. You can't see the wood for the trees, I suppose, in a
Very
situation
good.
like that. That wasn't
Absolutely.
scripted, I can promise you.
It's great.
In terms of how you actually prove to your customers, clients, team members, whatever you want to term them, how do you show how much money goes into it? Because it's all well and good saying that 18% is our net margin,
Mm.
but actually, they don't know. They can't.
Yeah.
They can't pull that and go, "Oh, it is actually." It could be that you're taking more, with the greatest respect.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when you're a non-profit or a charity, you have to publish everything and it's audited. So that's what we miss. That's the big deal. And so what we've been doing ever since is what we call radical transparency, where we publish everything that we possibly can on this kind of big. It's a big spreadsheet basically. We call it our public ledger. It's got everything, all of our transactions and receipts.
I
It's
did see
got
that on the website, the
yeah,
FAQs. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it's got our financials, it's got our board meeting minutes, and it's got whenever we've taken a plane anywhere, which is only a handful of times, needs must, and anything that we feel that that anyone else should know, that you should know, and that that's become our bit of, that's where we've gained a little notoriety. There's so much hesitancy around climate or like mistrust, that we've turned it into a bit of our own opportunity. If we can kind of break down that wall with radical transparency, we could be onto something. For example, we run these kind of open Zoom meetings now, where I just hang out on a Zoom meeting for half an hour or an hour, and then anyone can just jump on, any members of the public or some of our largest customers or individuals, and they can just pepper me with questions, and I can just answer straight off, just to say, often, there's an opportunity for us to really listen and see what sorts of things that are on people's minds. But I love the idea that I will always be incredibly approachable, that you can ask anything, because one day you'll see someone might see a news headline that says, 1 trillion trees can save the planet. And then a week later, it could say, no, 1 trillion trees can't save the planet. And maybe even worse headlines. And they'll be like, Elliot, I read this thing. Like, I need some
Yeah,
assurances
yeah.
here on this one. And so, yeah, we're looking at ways that we can keep on lifting the lid. We're even kind of toying with the idea of like, could I just literally live stream my day? Is that just insane? But
Just shove a camera up there.
yeah,
Just
yeah, yeah, yeah.
film what's going
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. Because the mistrust is major, and if I
Yes.
can do a lot about that, then our mission just becomes so much easier.
That's really interesting. And in terms of when you kind of go for funds, for instance, and you've crowdfunded some more money, and I get that.
Mm.
But in terms of the initial fund, the investors, so General Catalyst, they'll want a return. So
Yeah.
they'll, in theory, correct me if I'm wrong, but want as much margin as possible so that they get their money back tenfold.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that from an
Yeah.
ethical point of view?
That's really good. And why we went with General Catalyst in the end, they're not a sustainability fund, but they asked all the questions that warmed my heart. They said their main thing was, how do we see that we're going to be able to balance the kind of profit and purpose as we continue scaling? And they're exceptionally supportive of everything that I was saying. What's interesting is there's a safety mechanism of taking enough profit or taking too much money out of the business starts to damage your mission. When you set the bar high for transparency, there's not much room to hide. When there's a benchmark of what is an okay thing to do, you can't just take 50% margin and expect, businesses and individuals to be fine with that. Ultimately, if we're going to achieve our grandiose mission, our kind of worthy mission, it will be because we'll have balanced or towed the right line. And so it's kind of I really hope it's self-correcting, because when, let's say, I dropped off the face of a cliff and a profit-hungry CEO was installed, it's going to be difficult for them to grow an ethical, altruistic,
Yeah, yeah.
purpose-led business without reneging or compromising on quite a few fundamental areas. And so, I've set the bar high, and it's going to look shady
Yeah.
when you pull all that away.
Yeah.
And so that's how I feel that could be quite heartening. We've got things like mission log in our kind of articles of association. It's kind of we're legally a social enterprise. We have to be doing good for the planet, and that can't change, and all sorts.
Really?
There's lots of levers and dials within that. I'm not going to pretend that it's kind of ironclad, but the ultimately consumer power is important. And
Yeah.
when you combine consumer power with radical transparency, it doesn't leave much room to hide,
No.
essentially.
And it's just what strikes me as interesting is when you went for your next fund, your 3.6 million pound crowd fund.
Mm.
So you asked the public to give you the money. A, why didn't you go to General Catalyst? And B, that gave you a 75 million quid valuation. That's a huge amount of cash. Why not jump ship, take the cash, go and do something else? Why did you carry on
Yeah.
grafting, trying to change the world when actually money hungry entrepreneurs might go, thank you?
Yeah, interesting one. And on the crowdfund was great for us because you could just go to another investor and ask
Yeah.
for more money. But crowdfund means that also in the kind of or the safety mechanisms, and I was talking about, being part owned by our community is amazing. If our
4% you gave away, was it
yeah,
4.5%?
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds small, but actually the more you know about equity and on the larger companies, that's actually a pretty decent chunk of, my equity isn't much larger than something like that, for example.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. We've got buckets of co-founders, and
Do you give options when to new
yeah,
members of staff as well?
yeah,
Okay, so
exactly.
you're fully diluted.
Yeah, exactly. So crowdfunders part of it, and we're part staff
Yeah,
owned,
yeah.
employee owned, and wouldn't it be amazing when one day that's more than 50% owned by the people and the companies who are supporting us. So this is a really good thing for an ethical business. I'd
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I'd
100%.
say everyone should be doing it. Why would you stay with the company is one, it's some investors I've been speaking to is a bit worried about the amount of equity that any individual owns, because there are so many co-founders essentially. Surely you're not that attached to this company, because you could just jump off, you could do something else and then have 100% ownership, for example.
Exactly.
But we're what is harder to convey is that we're not doing it for the money, and it's really difficult. As we get more successful, I will have a bigger responsibility to say that it's not for the money. At some point, when I'm sure that my family is kind of taken care of, I hope to be able to say, actually, all of my equity, or as much as I can afford, is betrothed to like a non-profit foundation, and like be able to kind of publish salaries and all sorts of things, to be able to say, okay, so this guy legitimately there is no vehicle of getting the cash into him.
Yeah, not some sort of
Yeah,
back of the fag packet SPV that takes it out so that you
yeah,
can actually be
exactly.
transparent, I suppose. And in
Yeah.
terms in terms then of the 50% employee owned or community owned,
Mm.
yeah, that's a huge amount of equity to give away. That's a person of significant control first and foremost.
Hmm.
They could surely have a massive vote of no confidence, vote of change. They could do anything,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't be able to say no.
Yeah. So
So
it's,
how would
it's
you deal with that?
interesting. So yeah, so the kind of the with crowdfund, the voting rights are different because you're through this kind of larger vehicle, and so there's a little bit more limited, and also the founding team has kind of preferential voting rights at the
So you've
moment.
got different options.
Yeah, absolutely. In truth, we'll work this out, and we've got options, as you just said. So we'll work this out when we're a little bit older. What's the right balance?
Hmm.
Investors, as you were saying, are looking to a return on investment. Investors, generally have great rights when it comes to helping kind of steer the ship,
Hmm.
essentially. So investors will be looking for the return on investment, but you know that is still aligned to hopefully our mission.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
for example, you've got, for me, two main routes. It's great you've got General Catalyst and other investors investing some money, that'll start to max out at around 200 million pounds, for example. But it's insane to think, but one day that won't be enough, and you'll be looking to the kind of the very largest companies like Microsoft, for
Hmm.
example. They're big in the climate world now, and they are big and deep pocketed. It could be that one day we find like a ethically aligned company who is able to deploy the seriously big numbers, enable it to actually get us to to one day to one place that we're after.
Hmm.
Or you can go public, as they say, go on the stock market, and then the investors get their money back through that. And then what's quite neat about that is then you genuinely are publicly owned, but
Yeah.
that's his own kind of world and this kind of sea of tumultuous activity.
That would be fascinating if you went public, though. If
It
you
would.
IPO'd, I think that would be really, really interesting because surely
Yeah,
you'd be one of the first ever
yeah,
sustainable businesses or
yeah.
sustainably focused business to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be totally
Yeah.
unprecedented. There are no billion-dollar
No.
companies who've gone public like that. Um, you know, in a lot of ways, it's very well aligned with long-term goals. What's difficult is the short-termism of public markets, of course.
Yeah.
You know, chasing each quarter is difficult, and in reality, in that we're seeing growth isn't continual. It's kind of huge steps, plateau and major step up, plateau and major step up, and it makes me think, geez, you know, imagine chasing down quarterly profits every 3 months. It's an interesting one, and honestly, it's something that we've got to learn about. It's not been done before. It sounds like a nice idea. You've seen other companies like fighting back from being public and to gaining control.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not my area of forte either.
No,
So we'll see
it
it.
would be fascinating. And I know very, very little about IPOs as well, but I do think that would be an amazing story if you ever got that far. Do you think
Yeah.
that would genuinely on the horizon in the next couple of years, or is that something that's just idealistic and
Yeah.
maybe out of reach?
It's every month and week that goes on, it feels
More and more
that
realistic.
that the next step is closer and closer. You know, I didn't think that we'd be here planting 100,000 trees a day or near to that. You know, it could be soon a million or like a day, you know, and then to a billion a day, and all sorts of climate action that we fund. And there's it's, you know, you can probably getting the fact that I'm generally humble,
100% and
and
passionate.
yeah, and you know, but I think we've got this amazing team,
Yeah.
who can do a good job of what we're setting out to achieve. So
But
I hope so.
But it isn't just planting trees, though, is it, Elliot? So you don't just plant 100,000 trees and that's that, and it grows from there. There's solar, there's wind, there's multiple different things that Ecologi
Yeah.
supports. How do you split where the money goes and what the right program to put it into is?
So the trees are where people are passionate. You know,
Is that because it's tangible and they get
yes,
it?
exactly. Yeah. Really hard to get excited about a methane digester that gets added onto a landfill site that sucks up the waste methane and converts into renewable energy. Cool for the nerds, but you know, it's
I
less.
get it's not something for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So the trees are a bit like a gateway climate
Yeah.
solution,
Yeah.
and you know, gets you interested, gets you passionate. You know, and these trees, we're gonna need to give them some time to grow.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
just gone in the ground, and they're not doing any of our offsetting. We never use them in our calculations, for example, for how much carbon reduction that we've been certified to do. You know, behind the scenes, we fund maybe about 30 different certainly climate projects a year. There's probably a dozen different climate solutions, like this methane biodigesters, clever, innovative stuff, renewable energy, wind, solar,
Yeah.
etc. Some amazing other projects like there are these great community projects which sounds uh, like a few steps away from impacting climate, but when you kind of do go through it, it becomes really engrossing. For example, we like to fund, well, just a bit of context. So I think it's about a billion or over a billion families in the world that cook their food and boil their dirty water from dirty sources on like an open fire, and that's really inefficient. So you have to do a lot of cutting down trees of the local area to kind of get that firewood convert into charcoal, and then you're burning.
Yes.
But we fund these projects which essentially requisition or kind of recycle these old cooking oil drums and then turn them into kind of these really fuel efficient cooking stoves. And then those get distributed. There's a lot less deforestation in the area, and there's a lot less air pollution, atmospheric
Yeah.
carbon. The air pollution thing is really interesting as well, because air pollution is like the number one killer for under 5-year-olds worldwide.
Is it?
And so if you're using 50%, maybe 60% less wood that you're burning, there's that same amount of less indoor air pollution. And it's a really big deal. So we like to fund a huge range of climate solutions. My background isn't environmental or atmospheric science. We have this external climate committee. There are about 15 industry academics and experts, and it's really reductionist, but they basically come up with a giant pie chart. They say you should be funding 20% into here, reforestation,
Right.
protecting existing forests, accelerating transition to clean energy and all sorts of things. And they help audit and understand our projects that we fund too. So yeah, we've got the right people on it.
But you're going to need to have 66,000 members to offset 1% to Germany.
Okay.
It's quite a lot.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Where have you done your numbers? Where
Websites.
Okay, nice. Okay, our team must have done that. Very nice. So if you think about 66,000 sounds like a lot, but actually, if you think about Netflix at 230 million paid subscribers
Hmm.
as at the time of talking, I mean, those are just absolutely unbelievable numbers. And, and why not have a climate subscription that can
Hmm.
reverse climate change? And so we should be able to get there. And, we talked about our trees. We don't like to really count them in the impact that they're making, but
Yes.
over, let's say, between 5 and 15 years, they will be having an impact. So right now, in certified carbon reductions, we've funded around 1.9 million tons of carbon reductions. That's about 6 million barrels of oil not burned,
Wow.
which is awesome.
Significant.
Which is really awesome. So that's through funding those sorts of climate solutions I talked about that weren't about planting trees. But if you include the growth of our trees, factoring in about 10 years worth of growth, for example, or even more, um, they start to add up into a really big deal. And so when you project those emissions, carbon reduction, sorry, with the other climate solutions, then that's about 0.2% of all the UK's carbon footprint at the moment.
Hmm.
This is, that's a really big deal for a tiny company, just a 3-year-old company, with 30 odd thousand members essentially. So, times 30,000, or you do the kind of the maths to kind of scale up to 230 million subscribers of the Netflix kind of territory.
Hmm.
It's exciting. And so it's practical. The economics will get wobbly at the end of the spectrum. Can you really plant 1 billion trees a day? That
Hmm.
sort of thing. One of our leading tree planting partners is already doing about 10 million a day. They were invested recently by Jeff Bezos's fund
Okay.
with a mandate to plant 1 billion trees
That's so you can
responsibly.
fly more rockets,
Exactly.
offset all
Yeah.
this rocket fuel.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's-
Yeah, but it sure doesn't have the billions of pounds of liquidity.
yeah,
Yeah,
he does.
yeah,
But in terms of potential partnerships, why is there not a partnership with Netflix where every subscriber on Netflix, £2 goes to Ecologi?
yeah. Oh, that'd be great. Love to
Because
get that
then,
set up.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, is there
yeah,
those kind of synergies that you're looking at doing, or is it
yeah.
wholly you guys on your own?
Yeah, the partnerships are an amazing opportunity to kind of like really shortcut, to be able to stand on the shoulders of
Mm.
their audiences that they've been building up for maybe 10 years, 20 years or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, so we do lots of interesting avenues. There's um there's lots of different ways. Like what just popped into my head just then was this really neat game. Do you know the game called Monument Valley? It's on the kind of iPhone, and it's this beautiful little puzzle platform explorer, and I don't know, hundreds of millions of kind of downloads at some, or maybe 10 million
Hmm.
downloads or whatever. It's bonkers numbers. Anyway, that studio then made this similar game, but it's about this kind of lovely girl who I think was based on Greta Thunberg,
Oh
and
yes,
she is kind of going. The game's called Alba, taking photos of wildlife in the air. But every app download meant they're planting a tree, and
that's lovely.
app's been out for not very long, and it's planted over 1 million trees. It was just so light touch, but so nicely aligned that it feels just very practical. And so businesses are finding lots of ways of integrating, doing something decent
Hmm.
with climate action. It could be like they win a contract and they say, let's say they're an agency, they win a contract and they plant 10,000 trees based on the scale of the contract that they've won.
Hmm.
Or they could gift some trees to all their employees. They might have 20,000
Hmm.
employees, gift like a little starter package of, their little mini forest, and then these 20,000 employees would then have their subscription if they wanted to carry on. So there's lots of interesting ways of working with these other kind of stalwarts
Hmm.
of, the kind of the big names out there. Yeah, I hope to be doing far more of it.
Are you an entrepreneur or an activist?
I'm an I'm an armchair environmentalist who's seen a viable future that we can get behind. That an activist I think of as someone who is out on the streets, putting the real hours in, disrupting their busy day's schedule to do something really extraordinary. Um, an entrepreneur is someone who can really clearly see the future of an opportunity and a problem to be solved. So I can do that bit. The armchair environmentalist to me is being able to understand what we need to do. We need to be able to solve climate at the tap of a few buttons. It sounds horrible, but that's where we're at, really. You know, people are looking after themselves and, you know, looking after their own stress levels or whatever they might be, you know, into. And, you know, I can use my innate kind of like, I'm not going to be out in the streets.
No.
I've done it a few times. It's incredible that they can put that kind of time in, or, you know, spend
Yes.
12 hours on a train to get to the other end of the country to
Yes.
put in a protest. That's incredible. So I kind of using my kind of natural skills there, I feel like an entrepreneur now, and you know I feel like, you know, it's been all whilst having a hesitancy, but it's exciting, you know. But could I apply what I know into a different area? I don't know. You know, I'm just guided by this clear view of what we need to be doing here.
Maybe we should trademark activepreneur. Maybe that should be the hybrid between entrepreneur and activist.
Yes, very nice. Yeah, absolutely. And more to them, you know, and popping a name on it can actually be, you know, can catalyze something really fantastic. And I'd really urge anyone who is thinking about climate, because that climate anxiety is real.
Yeah, it is.
You know, I'm not professed to be like a person who say it keeps me up at night. It made me really think deeply about whether we should have children or whether we should have a second child. Those are the times when I get my climate anxiety. I've seen hope, and I've seen the future, or I've seen a vision of the future that looks very prosperous. But yeah. But anyone who's feeling not so great about the future, I'd urge them to get into the area that they're not feeling great about. So if it's about climate, using that skills they probably had, you know, through whatever they've been doing at the moment, it's extremely likely that those skills would be needed broadly in this area. And I felt instantly better about my own personal contribution, as you can obviously imagine. But I felt better on day one, even when we celebrated 1,000 trees were planted. That it doesn't need to be about big numbers.
Yeah.
It just means that you're connected to the thing that you're working on.
So if we want to come on the journey with Ecologi, go through the journey onto the £1 billion valuation, or just make a massive change in the world as it currently stands, how can we get involved in Ecologi, and how can we do Ecologi Zero?
Very nice. So we've got a couple of different angles. Ecologi Zero certified Ecologi Zero is definitely something to be checking out, because if you run a small to medium-sized business, you can just start to know where your emissions are and where they lie. That's a really fascinating area, and maybe you're not ready for that yet. And we have this thing called a climate positive workforce, which just offsets the emissions of all your employees. It's like a monthly subscription.
How much is that, depending on the number of
it's about
employees?
£6 or £7 a month, and then if you've got some frequent flyers, it's more expensive than that. It's really low key, low cost. It's like 0.1% of your staff budget. So, you know, we like to think that any business should be able to get this kind of rung on the ladder. Yeah, come check us out. Ecologi with an I at the end instead of a Y.
Boom. Elliot, I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
it.
much, Oliver. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not listen to a few more and click subscribe? This podcast was produced by Pinpoint Media, and I'm Oliver Bruce. I hope we can speak again soon. Take care.